The alarm went off at 6:30, just like it did every single morning. She reached over and turned it off without even opening her eyes. Her hand knew exactly where the button was. 3 years of the same routine had made everything automatic. She got up, made the bed with hospital corners the way she always did, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed a woman who looked older than 34. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hair, once styled with care every morning, was now just pulled back into the same ponytail. It was easier that way. Everything she did now was about being easier, simpler, requiring less thought. Breakfast was toast and black coffee, always the same. The kitchen table had 2 chairs, but she only ever sat in one. The other chair had a jacket draped over it. It had been there for so long that dust had settled on the shoulders. She looked at it every morning while she ate, but she never moved it. The drive to work took 23 minutes. She knew because she'd timed it hundreds of times. She took the same route, parked in the same spot when it was available, and walked through the same entrance. The security guard said good morning. She nodded back. Words felt heavy these days, like they cost something to use. Her desk was in the corner of the 3rd floor, tucked away near the window. She liked it there. People didn't bother her much. She was good at her job, always had been. Numbers made sense. They followed rules. They didn't surprise you or leave you standing in a hospital hallway being told that there was nothing more they could do. Her co-workers were nice enough. They'd stopped asking her to join them for lunch about 2 years ago. At first, they'd tried hard. Invitations to happy hours, birthday celebrations, weekend plans. She'd said no so many times that eventually they just stopped asking. It was better that way. She didn't have to pretend to be interested in office gossip or weekend plans. She didn't have to fake smile at jokes that weren't funny. There was one woman, Beth, who still tried sometimes. Beth was older, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle way of talking. She'd lost her own husband years ago, so maybe that's why she understood. She never pushed, never demanded explanations. Sometimes she'd just leave a muffin on the desk with a note that said, "Thought you might like this." Those small gestures were the only ones that didn't feel suffocating. Lunch was always at her desk. A sandwich from home, an apple, a bottle of water. She'd eat while working, barely tasting the food. It was fuel, nothing more. She remembered when meals used to be different. When there was laughter and conversation and someone asking about her day like they really wanted to know. Now the silence was so thick she could almost touch it. The afternoon dragged on like afternoons always did. Spreadsheets, emails, phone calls about quarterly reports. Her boss seemed satisfied with her work. She never missed deadlines, never made mistakes. But she also never went beyond what was required. She'd once been the person who volunteered for new projects, who brought creative ideas to meetings. That person felt like someone from a different lifetime. At exactly 5 o'clock, she shut down her computer, grabbed her bag, and left. No lingering, no chatting by the elevator. Just out the door and back to her car. The drive home was quiet. She used to listen to music, loud and cheerful, singing along even when she didn't know all the words. Now the radio stayed off. The silence felt safer. Home was a small house in a quiet neighborhood. They'd bought it together, talking about how they'd fill the rooms with kids someday, how they'd plant a garden in the backyard, how they'd grow old there. The rooms were still mostly empty. The garden was just weeds now. Growing old was something she'd have to do alone. She made dinner without thinking about it. Pasta or chicken or sometimes just cereal. It didn't matter. She ate standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone without really seeing anything. Social media was full of people living lives that seemed impossible. Vacations and celebrations and smiling faces. She wondered if any of them knew how quickly it could all disappear. After dinner, she'd sit on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading, or a show she wasn't really watching. The house was too quiet, but she couldn't bring herself to fill it with noise. There was one room she never went into unless she had to. His office. Everything was exactly as he'd left it that morning. His coffee cup still on the desk, papers scattered around, a pen lying across an open notebook. Her sister called every week, usually on Wednesday evenings. The conversations were always the same. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Have you thought about seeing someone? Maybe talking to a therapist? She'd give short answers, yes, mostly, maybe. The calls never lasted long. What was there to say? She knew her sister worried. She knew everyone worried. But she didn't have the energy to make them feel better about her grief. Tuesday evenings were for the support group. She'd been going for 2 years. It was held in the basement of a community center, with folding chairs arranged in a circle and weak coffee in styrofoam cups. People shared their stories. Some cried. Some had clearly turned a corner and were there to help others. She mostly just listened. When it was her turn to speak, she'd say something brief. "I'm doing okay," taking it day by day. It was easier than explaining that she wasn't sure she was doing okay at all. There was a routine to grief, she'd learned. Everyone expected you to be devastated at first. That was acceptable. But there was this invisible timeline where people started expecting you to be better, to move on, to get back to normal. After a year, people stopped asking how she was doing with that careful, gentle tone. After 2 years, they seemed almost annoyed that she wasn't over it yet. After 3 years, they just avoided the topic altogether. But how do you get over losing the person who knew you better than anyone? The person who remembered that you liked your coffee with too much cream and no sugar. The person who knew that you needed exactly 14 minutes of silence when you first came home from work, before you were ready to talk. The person who made you laugh by doing terrible impressions of celebrities. How do you just move on from that? She'd tried in small ways. She'd gone on a date 6 months ago, set up by well-meaning friends who thought she needed to get back out there. It had been a disaster. The man was perfectly nice, but she'd spent the entire dinner comparing him to someone he could never measure up to. She'd gone home early, claiming a headache, and never answered his follow-up texts. At night, lying in bed, the silence was the worst. She'd bought a white noise machine that hummed with artificial rain sounds. It helped a little, but sometimes in the space between awake and asleep, she'd forget. Just for a second, she'd reach out expecting to find someone there. The empty space beside her felt like a canyon. She knew what people thought, that she was stuck, that she needed to let go, that life was passing her by. Maybe they were right, but knowing something and being able to do something about it were two completely different things. She'd forgotten how to be happy, forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something, forgotten that there was supposed to be more to life than just getting through each day. The weekends were the hardest. Too much empty time. She'd clean the house thoroughly, do laundry, grocery shop. Tasks that filled the hours. Sometimes she'd drive to the cemetery with flowers. She'd sit there and talk out loud, telling him about her week, about nothing really, wondering if he could hear her, wondering if he'd be disappointed in how she'd let everything go. This was her life now. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. A loop with no exit in sight. She wasn't living. She was just existing, moving through the motions like an actor who'd forgotten their lines but kept walking across the stage anyway. And she couldn't see how anything would ever be different. The email came on a Monday morning. The company was hiring someone new for their department. Budget expansions, new projects, the usual corporate talk. She barely paid attention to these announcements anymore. People came and went. It didn't affect her work, and that's all that mattered. The new person started on a Wednesday. She heard the commotion from her corner desk. Voices in the hallway, introductions being made. That forced cheerfulness that always accompanied someone's first day. She kept her eyes on her computer screen, typing numbers into spreadsheets, hoping no one would bring him over to her desk. Of course, they did. "And this is our corner expert," her supervisor said, that bright tone people use when they're trying too hard. "She's been with us for 8 years, knows everything about how we do things here." She looked up briefly, gave a small nod, then looked back at her screen. The new guy said hello. His voice was friendly but not pushy. She mumbled something that might have been a greeting and went back to work. She heard her supervisor leading him away, probably explaining that she preferred to work independently. It was the polite way of saying she didn't want to be bothered. His desk was next to hers. Of course it was. The only empty space in the office happened to be right there. She could see him from the corner of her eye, unpacking a box of personal items, a small plant, a photo frame face down on the desk, a coffee mug with some faded logo. Normal things. She'd stopped bringing personal items to work years ago. What was the point? For the first few days, he was quiet, learning the systems, reading through old files, asking occasional questions to other coworkers. He didn't try to talk to her beyond the necessary work stuff. Maybe someone had warned him. Maybe he just picked up on the clear leave me alone vibe she gave off. Either way, she was grateful. But then she started noticing small things. He hummed while he worked. Not loudly, Not enough to be annoying, just quiet little tunes under his breath. Sometimes he'd chuckle at something on his computer screen. Once he said, "Oh, come on," to his monitor when something wasn't working. Like the computer could hear him and might cooperate if he just asked nicely. It was strange having someone so alive sitting right next to her. The coffee incident happened at the end of his first week. She heard a crash, then a very sincere "oh no" from his direction. She glanced over. His coffee cup had tipped and dark liquid was spreading across his desk, seeping toward his keyboard. He'd jumped up, papers in hand, trying to save what he could. "That's just perfect," he said, but there wasn't real anger in his voice. "I guess my keyboard wanted to know what coffee tastes like. Should I get it cream and sugar too?" He was talking to himself, but she heard it. The corner of her mouth almost twitched. Almost. She caught herself and looked back at her screen. Beth appeared with paper towels, helping him clean up the mess. "First week and you're already making waves," she joked. "More like making puddles," he replied. "I'm honestly impressed by how far coffee can spread. It's like it has ambitions, dreams of reaching every corner of the desk." Beth laughed. A real warm laugh. She saw him smile at the sound, seeming pleased that he'd made someone's day a little lighter. Over the following weeks, she couldn't help but notice him. Not in a romantic way. She wasn't capable of that anymore. But he was hard to ignore. He brought a different energy to the office. During meetings, when everyone else sat with crossed arms and tired expressions, he'd lean forward, actually interested. He asked questions that showed he was really thinking about things, and he had this way of making observations that were just slightly off kilter. "Why do we call it a filing cabinet when nobody files anything anymore?" He'd asked once during a particularly boring budget meeting. "Should we call it a stuffing cabinet? A drawer of forgotten dreams?" A few people had laughed. She'd kept her face neutral, but something had stirred inside. Some long dormant part of her that remembered finding things funny. He started leaving sticky notes around the office. Not for her specifically, just random ones for anyone to find. On the coffee maker, "You're beautiful just the way you are." On the copier, "I'm making copies of my feelings for you." Silly things. Stupid things, really, but people smiled when they found them. She found one on her desk once. It just said, "I hope your day has been decimal." There was a little smiley face next to it. She'd stared at it for a long moment, unsure how to feel. It was a terrible pun. Decimal. Because they worked with numbers. It was the kind of joke that was so bad it almost circled back to being funny. She threw it away, but she thought about it on the drive home. The thing about him was that he didn't seem to be performing. Some people tried too hard to be funny, to be liked. It felt desperate. But with him, it was just who he was. He found small joys in ordinary things. He'd get genuinely excited about finding a good parking spot. He'd do a little victory gesture when his computer actually worked the way it was supposed to. He'd thank the vending machine when it gave him his snack without getting stuck. It was exhausting to watch. All that energy, all that effort to be positive. Didn't he know that life wasn't like that? That happiness was temporary and could be ripped away without warning. But he kept at it, week after week. And she found herself paying attention despite not wanting to. One afternoon, about a month after he'd started, the entire office's email system crashed. Completely down. Nobody could send or receive anything, and there was a major deadline approaching. People were panicking, making stressed phone calls, running between desks trying to figure out workarounds. He stood up at his desk, cleared his throat loudly, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is a drill. In the event of an actual email emergency, please proceed to the nearest fax machine from 1987. A few people looked at him like he was crazy, but then someone laughed. Then someone else. The tension in the room dropped just a little bit. "I'll also be accepting messages via carrier pigeon, smoke signals, or strongly worded looks from across the room," he continued. "We will get through this together. Remember, our ancestors survived without email. They also lived to the ripe old age of 35, but that's beside the point." More laughter. Even their supervisor cracked a smile. The crisis didn't go away, but suddenly it felt less catastrophic. They worked around it, made phone calls, used other systems, and they did it with less panic than they would have otherwise. She'd watched the whole thing from her desk. Hadn't smiled. Hadn't laughed. But something had shifted. Just barely. Like a door that had been sealed shut for years had loosened just a crack. That evening, Beth stopped by her desk before leaving. "He's nice, isn't he? The new guy." She shrugged, not looking up from her work. He's been through stuff too, you know, Beth said quietly. I can always tell. People who've seen darkness, they either become bitter or they fight to find light. He's one of the fighters. She didn't respond. Beth patted her shoulder gently and left. That night, she thought about what Beth had said. She'd assumed he was just one of those naturally happy people, the kind who'd never faced real hardship. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe he'd had his own losses, his own struggles. Maybe his lightness wasn't ignorance. Maybe it was a choice. The thought bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The next day, she actually looked at him when he said good morning. Really looked. His eyes were kind, but there were shadows there. The smile was real, but there was something behind it. Experience, understanding, maybe even pain. He caught her looking, and his smile got a little bigger. Good morning. I brought in donuts for everyone. They're in the break room. I got a variety, because I don't know everyone's preferences yet, but there's at least one with sprinkles because I believe sprinkles make everything better. It's science, probably. She almost said thank you. Almost. Instead, she just nodded and went back to her work. But later, when no one was around, she went to the break room. There was one donut left. It had sprinkles. She took it back to her desk and ate it slowly. It was good. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a donut. He started bringing treats every few weeks, sometimes cookies his neighbor had baked, sometimes fruit from the farmer's market. Once a bag of candy with a note that said, "Emergency chocolate rations for stressful days." He never made a big deal about it, just left things in the break room for people to enjoy. She started staying a few minutes later at work. Not leaving right at 5, just 5 or 10 minutes. She told herself it was to finish up tasks. But really, she was curious. Curious about this person who seemed determined to spread small happinesses in a world that didn't always deserve them. One evening, when most people had left, she heard him on the phone. His voice was different, quieter, sadder. I know, Mom. I miss her too. Every day. But staying in that sadness all the time. I can't do that. It's not what she wanted. There was a long pause. I'm not forgetting her. I'm honoring her. There's a difference. She felt like she was intruding on something private. She quietly packed up her things and left. But the word stayed with her. I'm not forgetting her. I'm honoring her. What did that mean? How could being happy honor someone you'd lost? It felt wrong. Disrespectful even. Grief was supposed to be heavy. It was supposed to hurt. That's how you showed you cared. But watching him, she started to wonder if maybe there was another way. A way she'd never considered. Not forgetting, not moving on, but moving forward. Carrying the love with you instead of being buried by the loss. She wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready. But for the first time in 3 years, there was the smallest spark of something in her chest. Not hope exactly, but maybe curiosity, maybe possibility. And she found herself actually looking forward to coming to work just a little bit, just to see what silly thing he might do next. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. One of those days that starts normal and ends up marking a line in your life, a before and after. The morning had been routine. She'd come in, settled at her desk, worked through her emails. He'd arrived a few minutes later with his usual cheerful greeting. She'd given her usual small nod. Their pattern was established now.
He tried to be friendly.
She allowed minimal interaction. It worked. Around 2 in the afternoon, their supervisor sent out an urgent message. The main server had crashed. Not just a glitch, a complete system failure. And they had a massive presentation due to corporate headquarters by 5 o'clock. Financial projections for the entire quarter. Hours of work from the whole department. All sitting on computers that wouldn't turn on. The IT department was already working on it, but they were talking about hours, maybe longer. The deadline wasn't flexible. Corporate didn't care about technical difficulties. Numbers were needed. Results were expected. The office descended into chaos. People were making frantic phone calls. Her supervisor looked like he might actually cry. Someone suggested they recreate everything by hand, but that was impossible. There wasn't enough time. Years of data, complex calculations, detailed analyses, all locked away in dead computers. She sat at her desk feeling strangely calm. This was the kind of crisis that once would have sent her into overdrive, leading the charge to find a solution. But that person was gone. She watched the panic around her with distant detachment. What was the worst that could happen? Someone would be angry. She'd been living with worse than anger for 3 years. Then she heard his voice cutting through the noise. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" The office went quiet. He was standing on his desk chair, actually standing on it, arms raised like some kind of motivational speaker. "I know this looks bad," he said. "And yes, technically, we're in what experts would call a situation. But let me remind you all of something important." He paused dramatically. Everyone stared at him, confused about where this was going. "We are warriors. Financial warriors. And throughout history, warriors have faced setbacks. Did the ancient fighters give up when their swords broke? No, they used sticks. Did the pioneers quit when their wagons broke down? No, they walked. And will we surrender just because our computers have decided to take an unauthorized vacation? Absolutely not." A few people exchanged glances. Was he being serious? He grabbed a stapler from his desk and held it up like a microphone. "I say we fight. I say we show these spreadsheets who's boss. I say we. Actually, I have no idea what I say next because I don't know how to fix computers, but my point is panicking won't help." He started pacing back and forth on his chair. "Let me tell you what I know about technology, which is nothing. Last week I asked my computer to open a file, and it showed me pictures of someone's vacation from 2015. Were they good pictures? Yes. Was it helpful? No. Did I learn anything about Carl's trip to Miami? More than I needed to." Someone giggled. Just a small sound, but it was there. "Technology," he continued, really getting into it now, "is a fickle friend. One day it's your best buddy, doing everything you ask. The next day it's pretending not to know you. Like that friend in high school who only talked to you when the popular kids weren't around." More laughter. He was building momentum. "But we, my dear colleagues, are smarter than machines. We have brains. We have thumbs. We have—" He looked around desperately. "Coffee. Lots and lots of coffee." He jumped down from the chair with a dramatic flourish, nearly losing his balance. He caught himself on the desk, arms windmilling. And that dismount was a perfect metaphor for our current situation. Shaky, uncertain, but ultimately we stayed upright. The office was laughing now. Real laughter. Even their supervisor had cracked a smile despite the disaster unfolding. "In conclusion," he said, straightening his shirt like he was finishing an important business presentation, "we will get through this, and in 20 years when they ask us about the great server crash, we'll tell our grandchildren that we were there. We survived, and it only took 10 years off our lives and possibly Carl's Miami vacation photos." "I don't even know anyone named Carl," someone shouted from across the room. "Exactly," he replied. "The mystery deepens." The whole office was cracking up now. The tension that had been suffocating them just moments ago had lifted. The problem still existed. The deadline was still approaching. But somehow it felt manageable. Less like the end of the world. She'd been watching the entire performance from her desk. And she felt it. That thing she hadn't felt in so long. It started in her chest. A bubble of something light. Something that wanted to escape. She fought it. Pressed her lips together. No, she couldn't. She wouldn't. He started doing impressions of their boss dealing with the crisis. It was ridiculous. Over the top. His imitation voice was terrible. He was making exaggerated gestures, pacing back and forth, pretending to have a panic attack in slow motion. The bubble grew bigger. It pushed against her chest. Her throat. She could feel her face wanting to betray her. The muscles trying to remember how to smile, how to laugh. And then, he was saying, "Corporate will call and say, 'Where's our report?' And we'll say funny story about that." She couldn't hold it back anymore. It burst out of her. A small sound at first. Almost like a hiccup. But then another one came. And another. Before she knew what was happening, she was laughing. Really laughing. The sound came from somewhere deep inside, somewhere she'd forgotten existed. Her whole body shook with it. The laughter came in waves, each one bigger than the last. It felt strange. Foreign. Like using muscles that had atrophied. The office went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. She didn't care. She couldn't stop. The laughter kept coming. And then suddenly there were tears too. Streaming down her face. She didn't know if she was laughing or crying or both. Her face was wet and her chest hurt and she couldn't catch her breath. It was too much. All the emotions she'd been holding back for 3 years came flooding out at once. The grief, the loneliness, the exhaustion of just existing day after day. And underneath all of that, something else. something that felt almost like relief. She stood up abruptly. Her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Everyone was staring at her. She could see the concern on their faces. Beth had stood up, reaching out, but she couldn't deal with that. Couldn't handle their looks of pity or confusion. She grabbed her purse and rushed toward the bathroom. The tears were coming harder now. She could hear herself making sounds that were part laugh, part sob. She pushed through the bathroom door and locked herself in a stall. She sat down on the closed toilet lid and let it all out. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Her hands covered her face. The laughter had turned completely to tears now. 3 years of tears that she'd been rationing out carefully, allowing herself only small, controlled amounts of grief. Now it all came at once, and it was overwhelming. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time felt weird, stretchy. Eventually, the sobs quieted to sniffles. She grabbed toilet paper and wiped her face. She must look terrible. Her eyes would be red and swollen. Her nose was running. She probably looked like she'd been through something traumatic, which she supposed she had. There was a gentle knock on the bathroom door. "Hey." It was Beth's voice. "You okay in there?" She didn't answer. Wasn't sure she could speak yet. "I'm leaving something by the door," Beth said. "Take your time. Nobody's judging you. We all care about you, you know." She heard footsteps walking away. After a few more minutes, she stood up and looked at herself in the mirror. She was right. She looked awful, but she also looked different somehow, like something had broken open inside her. She opened the bathroom door slowly. There was a small paper bag sitting on the floor. Inside was a bottle of water, some tissues, and a chocolate bar. There was a note in Beth's handwriting. "Breathe. It's okay to feel things." She took the bag and went back inside the bathroom. She drank some water, splashed cold water on her face, took deep breaths until her heart stopped racing. Her hands were still shaking a little bit. The whole thing felt surreal. She'd laughed, actually laughed, after all this time, and the strange thing was it hadn't felt like a betrayal. In that moment when the laughter came, she hadn't been thinking about her loss. She'd just been present, alive, feeling something other than emptiness. The guilt came rushing in then. How could she laugh when he was gone? How could she let herself feel joy even for a moment when he'd never feel anything again? The familiar weight settled back on her chest. This was why she'd kept everything locked up tight. Because the moment you let one feeling in, all the others followed. She finally emerged from the bathroom. It was almost 4 o'clock. The office was quieter now. IT had gotten some computers working. People were frantically trying to pull together what they could for the presentation. Her supervisor saw her and waved her over, but his expression was kind, not demanding. "Take the rest of the day," he said quietly. "We've got this covered. Go home, rest," she wanted to argue, to prove she was fine. But she wasn't fine, so she just nodded and went to get her things from her desk. He was sitting at his desk when she walked over. He looked up at her with concern. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to upset you." She shook her head, opened her mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. So she just grabbed her purse and jacket and headed for the door. As she reached the elevator, she heard footsteps behind her. He was there, holding a small piece of paper. "I just wanted to give you this," he said, holding it out. "You don't have to read it now, or ever, but just, here." She took it without looking at it and got on the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw him standing there, looking worried and sad and hopeful all at once. In her car, before starting the engine, she unfolded the paper. His handwriting was messy but readable. Laughter and tears are both honest. Both are okay. Sometimes they come together because grief and joy are more connected than we think. "I hope you're all right." She sat in the parking lot for a long time, holding that note in her hands. And for the first time in 3 years, she thought maybe, just maybe, there might be a way forward that she hadn't considered. A way that didn't mean forgetting. A way that didn't mean the pain would go away. But maybe, possibly, a way that meant she could live again. She didn't go to work the next day. Called in sick for the first time in over 2 years. She spent the morning in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying what had happened. The laughter. The tears. The way everyone had looked at her. The note that was now sitting on her nightstand. Folded and refolded so many times the creases were starting to wear thin. Her sister called around lunchtime. "Beth told me what happened. Are you okay?" Of course, Beth had told her. They'd been conspiring to worry about her for years now. She should have been annoyed, but mostly she just felt tired. I'm fine. You're not fine. You laughed and then cried and ran out of work. That's not fine. It was just embarrassing. It was human, her sister said softly. You felt something. That's not embarrassing. That's progress. Like grief was a linear path with markers you were supposed to hit. First you cry. Then you get angry. Then you accept. Then you laugh at a coworker's joke and suddenly you're making progress. As if healing was something you could track on a chart. I don't want to talk about it, she said. Her sister sighed. Okay, but I'm here when you do. And hey, maybe don't go back into hiding after this. You let something out. That's good. Scary, but good. After they hung up, she thought about that word. Hiding. Is that what she'd been doing? She'd thought she was just surviving. Getting through each day, but maybe her sister was right. Maybe she'd been hiding from life. From feeling. From the possibility that things could be different. She went back to work on Monday. Walked in expecting everyone to stare or whisper or treat her like she was made of glass. But people mostly acted normal. A few gave her kind smiles. Beth squeezed her shoulder as she passed. And that was it. The world hadn't ended because she'd shown emotion. Life just continued. He was already at his desk when she arrived. He looked up when she sat down, gave her a small smile and said, "Good morning," in a voice that was gentle but not pitying. Then he went back to his work. No big speech. No awkward questions. Just normal. She appreciated that more than she could say. The morning passed quietly. She focused on her work, losing herself in numbers and formulas. Comfortable territory. But around 10 o'clock, he rolled his chair over to her desk. She tensed, expecting some kind of conversation about what happened. "I need help," he said. "This spreadsheet is giving me attitude. I think it's personally offended by my math skills." She looked at his screen. He'd set up the formula wrong. Simple mistake. She showed him the correction. "You're a genius," he said. "This spreadsheet and I were about to have words. You've saved our professional relationship." The corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. He rolled back to his desk. That was it. No therapy session. No deep discussion. Just normal work interaction. It felt like a gift. At lunch, instead of eating at her desk like usual, she found herself in the break room. Not because she wanted to be social. Just because staying at her desk suddenly felt like hiding, and she was tired of hiding. Beth was there, heating up something in the microwave. "Glad you're back," she said, and left it at that. He came in a few minutes later, saw her sitting at the table. "Mind if I join you?" She shrugged. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. He sat down with a container of leftovers. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then he spoke, his voice casual. "My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer." She looked up at him, surprised. He kept his eyes on his food like he was just mentioning the weather. "I did the whole thing. The anger. The depression. The feeling like I'd never be okay again. Spent about 8 months barely functioning. My mom eventually told me I had 2 choices. I could honor her memory by being miserable forever, or I could honor it by living the way she'd want me to live. And she'd want me to find joy, to laugh, to keep going." He finally looked at her. It felt impossible at first. Like laughing would mean I didn't miss her. Like being happy would mean I'd forgotten her. But that's not how it works. The grief doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently. She didn't know what to say. This man she'd dismissed as just naturally cheerful, as someone who didn't understand darkness, had been through his own hell. Was still going through it, probably. "I'm not telling you how to grieve," he continued. "Everyone's path is different. But that thing that happened last week when you laughed, that wasn't wrong. That was your heart remembering how." It felt like betrayal, she heard herself say. The first real words she'd spoken to him beyond work necessities. "I know," he said. "It did for me too at first. But feeling joy doesn't dishonor them. If anything, refusing to ever feel joy again, that's what dishonors them. Because they loved us. And people who love us want us to be happy." She thought about that. Would he have wanted her to live like this? Trapped in grief, going through the motions, never really living? She knew the answer. He'd have hated it. He'd have wanted her to move forward, to find happiness again. But knowing that and being able to do it were very different things. Over the following weeks, something shifted. She started having lunch in the break room regularly, started listening when people talked, even occasionally offering comments, started staying a few minutes after work, not rushing out the door the second the clock hit 5 and she started talking to him. Real conversations. About work at first, then gradually about other things. He told her about his late wife, how they'd met at a concert, how she'd been terrible at cooking but insisted on trying new recipes anyway. How she'd left him notes hidden around their apartment, and he was still finding them years later. She told him about her husband. How he'd proposed on a random Tuesday because he said he couldn't wait for a special occasion. How he'd do terrible impressions of movie characters that never sounded anything like the actual actors. How the last thing he'd said to her that morning was, "Don't forget to smile today," before he left for work. He never came home. "He sounds like he was good at living," he said. "He was," she replied. "I'm not sure I am anymore." "You're learning again," he said. "That counts." They started getting coffee together sometimes. Not dates. Just two people who understood something about each other that most people didn't. Two people who knew what it was like to lose everything and somehow have to keep going. He was patient with her. Never pushed. When she had bad days and retreated into silence, he didn't take it personally. He'd just leave a silly sticky note on her desk or bring her a coffee with too much cream, no sugar. The way she liked it. She started to realize he'd been paying attention all along. One Tuesday, after her grief support group, she found herself actually sharing, really talking instead of giving her usual one-sentence updates. She told them about the laughter, about the guilt, about slowly learning to let herself feel things again, about how terrifying and necessary it was. An older man in the group, someone who'd lost his wife 5 years ago, nodded. "The hardest part is giving yourself permission to be happy. Feels like you're leaving them behind, but you're not. You're taking them with you in a different way." That night, she went home and did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She went into his office. Really went in, not just standing in the doorway. She sat in his chair, looked at his things. The coffee cup, the papers, the pen, all covered in dust now. She picked up the pen and held it. It was just a pen, an object. It didn't contain his essence. It wasn't him. He was gone and no amount of preserving his space would bring him back. She cried, but it was different this time. Not the desperate, drowning kind of crying. More like release. Like saying goodbye to the version of herself that thought keeping everything frozen would somehow make the loss hurt less. The next weekend, her sister came over. Together, they started sorting through his things. She kept some items. The watch he'd worn every day, his favorite jacket, photos, things that meant something. But the rest, the everyday items that were just taking up space, those she packed up for donation. Someone else could use them, could get joy from them. It hurt. God, it hurt. Every item felt like letting go a little more, but it also felt necessary, like making room for the possibility of something new. She called him that evening. They'd exchanged numbers weeks ago for work purposes initially. Now she used it for something else. "I cleaned out his office today," she said when he answered. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but also like I can breathe a little easier." "Both of those things can be true," he said. They talked for an hour, about grief and healing and how neither of those things looked like you'd expect them to. How some days you felt fine and other days you felt like you were right back at the beginning. How that was normal. How it was all part of the messy, non-linear process of learning to live with loss. "Thank you," she said before they hung up. "For what?" "For making me laugh. For reminding me that I could." "You did that yourself," he said. "I just told bad jokes at the right moment." That night she slept better than she had in years. The house felt different, lighter, like the air could move through it properly now instead of being trapped around preserved memories. At work the next week, she did something shocking. She made a joke. It wasn't even a good joke. Something about the coffee machine having an existential crisis. But people laughed, probably more from surprise than humor. And she smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. He caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small nod. Like he was proud of her. Like he understood how big that small moment was. She started doing other things too. Accepted an invitation to a coworker's birthday happy hour. Went to a movie with her sister. Planted some flowers in the neglected garden. Small things. Baby steps toward rejoining the world of the living. She still had hard days. Days when the grief felt as fresh as it had 3 years ago. Days when she couldn't get out of bed. Days when smiling felt impossible. But those days were becoming less frequent. And more importantly, she was learning that having a good day didn't mean she was forgetting. It just meant she was surviving. And maybe that's what he would have wanted all along. 6 months after that first laugh, she stood in her living room looking at the space that used to be his office. It was a reading room now. Comfortable chair by the window. Bookshelves she'd put up herself after watching 3 YouTube tutorials. Plants that she actually remembered to water, and on the wall, their wedding photo. Both of them so young, so happy, so certain they had forever. She could look at it now without that crushing weight in her chest. Could smile at the memory instead of drowning in the loss. The grief was still there. Would always be there. But it had shifted from being the only thing she felt to being one of many things she felt. The doorbell rang. Her sister, right on time. They'd started having Sunday dinners together. Sometimes just the two of them. Sometimes her sister brought her kids. Sometimes other people joined. Today was one of those days. I brought wine, her sister announced, holding up a bottle, and also Beth, who I ran into in the parking lot. Beth came in behind her, carrying what looked like homemade cookies. Hope you don't mind the extra guest. Not at all. And she meant it. A year ago, the thought of people in her space would have felt intrusive. Now it just felt nice. He arrived a few minutes later with takeout containers. They'd discovered a shared love of Thai food and had gotten into a friendly argument about which restaurant was best. This was his pick tonight. Fair warning, he said, setting the food on the table. I may have ordered too much. I have a problem with portion control and optimism. Those are good problems to have, Beth said. They settled around the table, passing containers back and forth, talking about their weeks. Normal conversation, nothing heavy or profound. Just people sharing space and food and time. She watched them interact, this little group that had somehow formed around her. People who'd been patient with her darkness. Who'd given her space when she needed it and gentle pushes when she needed those too. Who'd let her heal at her own pace. Remember when you used to eat lunch at your desk every single day? Her sister said, grinning. And now look at you. Hosting dinner parties. This is not a party. This is 4 people eating takeout. Still counts, he said. You're socializing voluntarily. That's character growth. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. You make me sound like I was some kind of hermit. Not a hermit, Beth said kindly. Just someone who was hurting and needed time. After dinner, her sister helped her clean up while the other 2 argued about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. She could hear them laughing in the other room. He's good for you, her sister said quietly, loading the dishwasher. We're just friends. I know. That's not what I meant. I just meant he's good for you. He helped you remember how to be yourself again. She thought about that. Was she herself again? Or was she someone new, someone shaped by loss but not defined by it? Someone who'd been broken and was learning how to be whole in a different way. I think I helped myself, she said finally. He just showed me it was possible. Her sister hugged her. I'm proud of you. I know it wasn't easy. It's still not easy. Some days are really hard. But you're having more good days than bad now. That was true. The balance had shifted. The bad days still came. Days when she'd hear a song that was their song and have to pull over because she couldn't see through the tears. Days when she'd automatically set out 2 coffee cups before remembering. Days when the loneliness felt like a physical ache. But there were also good days. Days when she woke up actually looking forward to something. Days when she caught herself humming while working. Days when she made plans for the future instead of just surviving the present. The following week at work, something unexpected happened. He came in looking different, happy in a nervous kind of way. I have news, he said during their morning coffee. I've been seeing someone. Like dating someone. It's still new, but it's good. Really good. She felt a complex swirl of emotions. Happiness for him. A strange little twist that might have been jealousy, but wasn't quite that. Mostly just recognition that they were both moving forward in their own ways. That's wonderful, she said, and meant it. I wanted to tell you because, I don't know, it felt weird not to. You're important to me. You get things about me that most people don't. I'm glad you told me, and I'm glad you're happy. Are you okay? He asked. Really? She thought about it. Was she okay with him dating someone? Yes, surprisingly, it didn't diminish their friendship. Didn't make his help any less meaningful. If anything, it proved what he'd been trying to teach her all along. You could move forward without forgetting. You could find new happiness without betraying old love. I'm okay, she said. Really, truly okay, and she was. That was the surprising part. She was genuinely happy for him. She started doing more things on her own, signed up for a pottery class because she'd always thought it looked interesting. It turned out she was terrible at it. Her bowls looked more like abstract sculptures, and her vase collapsed during the second session. But she laughed about it, kept going anyway. The doing was more important than the outcome. She started going to concerts again. He'd loved live music. She'd avoided it because the memories were too painful. But one evening her sister convinced her to go see a local band. Standing there in the crowd, feeling the music vibrate through her chest, she cried. But she also danced. Both things at once. Grief and joy existing in the same moment. At the next grief support group, she shared her experience. I thought moving forward meant leaving him behind. But I'm realizing that's not true. He's still part of me, still shapes how I see the world. I'm just learning to carry him differently. The group nodded. They got it. This room full of people who'd lost someone important and were trying to figure out how to keep living. They were all at different stages, all taking different paths. But they understood each other in a way that people who hadn't experienced this kind of loss never quite could. One Saturday morning, she drove to the cemetery. She hadn't been in months. Not because she'd forgotten or stopped caring. Just because she didn't need to be there as much. He wasn't there. He was in her heart, in her memories, in the way she moved through the world. But still, she wanted to visit. Wanted to tell him about everything that had happened. So she sat by the headstone and talked out loud, not caring if anyone thought she was strange. I laughed, she told him. For the first time in forever, I really laughed. And I felt guilty about it, but I think you'd be mad at me for that. You'd want me to laugh. You'd want me to live. She told him about the new friend who'd helped show her the way, about cleaning out his office, about the pottery class and her terrible bowls, about all the small ways she was learning to be herself again. I miss you, she said. Every single day. That's never going to change. But I'm not drowning anymore. I'm swimming, and I think you'd be happy about that. She left flowers, walked back to her car, and as she drove away, she realized she felt lighter, not because the grief was gone. It would never be fully gone, but because she'd finally given herself permission to live with it instead of being buried by it. At work on Monday, she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. When someone made a joke during a meeting, she laughed, loud and genuine, and then she added her own joke. It got a good laugh. People smiled at her like they were seeing someone they'd missed because they were. She'd been gone for 3 years, not physically but in every other way that mattered, and now she was coming back, slowly, imperfectly, but coming back. That afternoon, she was working at her desk when he rolled his chair over. Want to get lunch? There's a new sandwich place I want to try. Sure, she said. Then, before she could stop herself, thank you. For everything. For being patient. For showing me that it was okay to be happy again. He smiled. You did the hard work. I just told some bad jokes. They weren't all bad, she admitted. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.